We have optical fibers all around our cities. They bring our internet. They could be used for things like monitoring traffic, monitoring sound pollution in the cities, the effects of climate change.
There was quite a lot of skepticism about how might it be used, who's going to benefit from it, how can this technology be used for good.
Distributed acoustic sensing is a technology that turns optical fibers into a set of virtual microphones that can sense whatever's happening around them in terms of acoustics or vibrations of pressure with extreme sensitivity. It works by sending light through the optical fibers in the same way that we use it to send for our internet, for telecommunications. And it uses part of the light that is scattered back into the origin to measure what the disturbances around the fiber were. This technology has been used quite successfully in maritime settings.
This is the same fibre optic which starts in your home, goes all the way underground, on the seafloor, across onto the other side of the continent. So for instance, we've been looking at a lot of volcanic activity, submarine geohazards, harbour traffic. So this is being able to listen to all sorts of vibrations that are both in the marine environment or on land.
So what we see here on the horizontal axis is time, and on the y-axis it's the offshore distance. But in this particular case, good segment of the cable up to a few kilometers was on land, and consequently we were able to capture a lot of activity that was taking place on land.
The cable location can be anywhere from the streets to houses. We can pick up different kind of sources. For example, in the city we can have people walking, any vibrations from cars, buses, transport, the rail, also even airplanes taking off or landing can produce vibrations strong enough to reach the cable. One of the other challenges is that we have to try to disentangle the different sources that we want to listen from the frequency of the data. So that's why we are employing different kind of instruments, from microphones that can pick up the human audible range,
both ways,
but also something below that with accelerometers, for example, get lower frequency range. The fiber optic cable is around this area, and so this is a very good location to have a look at the data and see the traffic, the buses, cars, people walking by, biking.
Because this is still a very emerging technology, it's very important to understand what the implications could be before it's too late.
When we think about surveillance, CCTV, like we can see that the cameras are there, we know that somebody is maybe watching us. Whereas with DAS, it's all underground, we have no idea if somebody is sensing the environment around where we are right there, it's completely invisible. At the very beginning, we organised these 3 workshops where we were asking citizens what do they think about DAS. They shared the same concerns about the environment and the cost of this technology. How do we engage with policymakers to let them know about this technology, how it might be useful, how it might be nefarious perhaps? The ideal outcome would be a clear understanding of what are the implications of DAS, and that information is accessible and that anyone could be able to learn about this technology, see how it might be relevant to their lives.